Based on both of your experiences in Northern Ireland and the Middle East, what are the essential elements to being an effective peacemaker?
I want to tell you, I'm going to commit the truth here. I probably shouldn't do this, but when we were on the way in here, I said, Tony, you just came out with a book. I want you to go first because I want to sell more of the books. It's very, very good, the book. And he's thought about all this in an organized fashion more recently than I have. So I'd like our guest to go first, and then I'll fill in the blanks. Sort of.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say when we thought about the peace process and what is the most important thing, you kind of looked at the floor for a moment and said blind luck, which is more or less in a way what we had in Northern Ireland. I mean, it was when we went to do the Good Friday Agreement. I'd actually originally thought that we would be there for a day. We'd get the agreement signed. Actually, I had to go, in fact, to go and see the Spanish Prime Minister the next day. So I'd literally planned my whole diary on the basis we'd get this deal signed, and everyone said, look, we've done all the preparatory work, you come in and sign it. Well, I got there, and 4 days later, I emerged. And it was, in a sense, luck that we got into such a hothouse atmosphere that in the end people began to feel it was more embarrassing not to do the deal than to do it. And if I had two sort of lessons out of peacemaking, certainly so far as Northern Ireland is concerned, is the first is that you've got to create a basic framework of principle on which they can all agree, right? After that, there will be a prolonged period of negotiation and implementation. But you've got to get those basic principles agreed. And in the case of Northern Ireland, the two principles were the principle of consent. In other words, Northern Ireland remains part of the UK so long as the majority of people want it. And then in return for that, equality and justice between unionists and nationalists, between Protestants and Catholics. So there was a basic framework of principle that we got people attracted to. The second thing, frankly, is never give up. Never give up, no matter how difficult it is, no matter how hard, just keep going. And we used to have this phrase, if you can't solve it, manage it, but don't not solve it and not manage it. Just one final thought, actually. When I finally got to Spain, the Spanish Prime Minister Aznar, had actually had my family, because I was supposed to go out with my family, they'd then be staying with them for 3 days, and I hadn't been there, right? So I go in, finally get there, and go into the room, and there he's sitting down at the breakfast table with my mother-in-law. And she says to me as we come in, oh, no, no need for you to be here. So I said, what have you been talking about? Oh, just Gibraltar. So as I remark in the book, I think she may have had as good an answer as anyone else. Anyway, but let me just say one thing. Throughout that whole Northern Ireland process, there was someone who was sitting or standing by the phone throughout, and it was President Clinton. And I can tell you, the way he picked up on what the internal politics were of that situation, thousands of miles away. And I think there must have been some of those late night calls where I wasn't making a great deal of sense, but he played an absolutely critical role. And honestly, I think this is one of the few times I've had the chance to say this to you. Without your intervention, actually, we would never have achieved that peace in Northern Ireland. And so from me to you, thank you.
The only thing I would add to that is I think that both the people and the leaders who have to live with the consequences of any peace agreement have to at least be open to an agreement before anything that any of the rest of us can do will work. And then I think it's a combination of doing what Tony said, getting the principles right, and then getting the things that flow from that. Once both sides in the Irish debate accepted the principle of consent or majority rule, and minority rights, they moved rather quickly to shared decision-making and shared economic benefits, and a special relationship for Northern Ireland with the Irish Republic, even as it remained part of the UK. And so I think that's important. But I also think it really matters if there are outside forces that can have a positive impact because the people negotiating need them or trust them in unusual ways. So, for example, obviously, the British Prime Minister and the Irish Prime Minister could have a big impact. And I could, simply because of the size of the Irish diaspora and the long-standing involvement of the Irish in America with Irish politics back home. But I still think you got to give a lot of credit to the people who were involved, the Irish themselves, all the party leaders within Northern Ireland who wanted desperately to do this, and to the public that was well ahead of the political leaders in saying we are sick of all this fighting. The other thing I think that is important for places like the UK and the United States to do, if we're trying to make peace, is to paint a picture of what it would look like after it was over. So you make the strongest possible argument that it's in the interest of the parties to make compromises and hold their nose and do whatever has to be done to get there. And you do that by minimizing the risks and maximizing the benefits of peace. And this is something that Tony's still working on, obviously representing the quartet in the Middle East. But we've got to paint a picture of what this is like at the end of the road. And they have to know that someone will be there to maximize the benefits and minimize the risk. Because, believe me, if they made an agreement day after tomorrow, we'd have 2 or 3 years that'd be pretty rough sailing, I think.
Yeah, I think one thing, when the President was just saying there, which is really important, is that the parties have to want it. Because I obviously reflect a lot about this now, being out with the Middle East peace process. Indeed, last night I was actually in Jerusalem. And here's the thing that I think is quite interesting about conflict resolution. And I know this may sound an odd thing to say, but sometimes they want it, but it's not very obvious that they do. And sometimes they believe that they want it, but are absolutely certain that the other side doesn't. You know, one of the things that I do constantly now when I'm talking, as I was yesterday with Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel, and then earlier in the day with President Abbas, is that sometimes, in fact, many times, you will get Israelis who will say to you, look, we want peace, but we don't have a partner because the other side doesn't. Or Palestinians will say, you know, of course we want peace. How could we not? But the Israelis aren't serious about it. And one of the functions of the people from outside, because in the end, the peace ultimately can only be made by those inside the process. But one of the functions of those that come in from the outside is, in fact, as I say, to be persuaders of the good faith of the other, so that you're able to go in there and say, look, I'm talking to these people. I know that they want peace. And so sometimes they want it, but they aren't sure the other wants it. And what you therefore get is a crisis, not so much of a process, but a crisis of credibility or confidence in the other side's good faith. And, you know, this, sometimes people say to me about the Northern Ireland and the Middle East peace process, what are the similarities? Well, the differences are very obvious. But one of the chief similarities is that when we first came to deal with that Northern Ireland peace process, you know, every time the Unionists would say to us, well, of course we want peace, but they don't. And the Republicans would say, you don't understand. We have always wanted peace, but the other side don't. So the important thing, I think, is to try and create the framework within which the other side can explore the good faith of the people they're dealing with.
Just one more thing briefly. I want to compliment you in your pre-prime ministerial years here. It also really helps if you're trying to broker a peace that is full of risks. If there is generally a bipartisan, statesman-like support for it. When John Major, your predecessor, was in office and they got that statement in December, you remember, of 92. And some things happened there, you know, before you came in office. We struggled along there and finally got a ceasefire in 95.